introduce Dr. Sarah Holmes from Liverpool Hope University. During the first period of lockdown, Sarah did some research on what churches have had to stop or change as a result of the pandemic, particularly in relation to their children and youth ministry. And Sarah will be reflecting on some of that and some of her thoughts of reimagining as we consider our work with children and young people, our work with children and families as we look to reimagining the future. Sarah, we're delighted you could be with us, and we look forward to hearing from you now.
Well, thank you, and I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for that. So just to briefly introduce myself, I work at Liverpool Hope University. I teach early childhood, but part of my time I get to spend researching children's faith and how we can support churches and families in nurturing faith. But also I'm a mum, I've got 4 children at home, and also I work on a voluntary basis at my local church doing various bits of children's work and so on. So I've got a few different hats that I'm kind of putting on tonight as I'm talking. But as Isabel said there, at the beginning of the pandemic last year, I wanted to see, there was so much talk about the impact of school closures on children, educationally, mental health and so on. But I wanted to see what is the spiritual impact on children of what's going on. So I've been doing some research across the UK, including some churches in Scotland were part of what I was doing, just kind of looking for what are some of the trends, what are some of the challenges, things that are working that we can kind of share together. I've also looked across some other sort of countries and so on, and I've been working with colleagues there to see in this global pandemic what's happening globally with children. So that's a bit of a backdrop of what I'll be kind of drawing upon in this few minutes that we have together tonight. So I'll just share my screen and then we'll get going. There we go. So reimagining the future and really building on what Martin was saying there in terms of kind of the place that we find ourselves in. So I don't know if any of this kind of resonates with you. This is things that were coming up to me when children's workers, parents, diocesan workers, regional advisors were sort of speaking to me and saying these kind of things were coming through time and time again. So a sense that teams were feeling perhaps very frustrated and quite despondent when the situation perhaps seemed like what could they do? They were so restricted with regarding children's, young people, family ministry. Perhaps the restrictions kept changing, the scene kept changing and so on. So really frustrated teams, but also in many cases some reduced teams for various reasons. People have decided to step back. So what I was finding was in many churches they were reporting perhaps a third of their usual volunteer team had withdrawn, perhaps due to health reasons, perhaps they were thinking of giving up anyway or whatever. But there was this reduction teams and at times a reduction in funding as well because of this crisis that we find ourselves in. And that seemed to be hitting the children's ministry perhaps a little bit harder than other sectors of the church. Segregated ministries, so this sense that rather than perhaps having time together with children and adults together worshipping, very much what was happening was this segregated sense. So children and adults often, I know there were exceptions to this, but often they were having different Zoom sessions, or now where physical meeting is possible. Again, it's easier if there's separate ministries there. Exhausted parents, I probably don't need to say much more about that one due to everything that has been going on. Decreased engagement from parents often. I think perhaps that's starting to turn a little bit now as we see churches beginning to open and so on. But that's one that we need to kind of be watching and seeing there. And some marginalisation. So for many young children, that's been really difficult in terms of particularly perhaps under 5s who can't social distance. How do we incorporate them into what we're doing? Children with special needs. Some of them have found actually the pandemic situation has helped them for various reasons, but many have found they've been marginalised. So I wonder if any of those ring true in your context. But that's some of the themes that have been coming out of my research. There was this research conducted that I wonder you'd probably be aware of, which is the Scottish Churches Leaders Forum. And these are some of the quotes here that you may have seen. So in terms of the changes in ministry patterns. So this research, sorry, this one here that is on the screen now, was looking at the whole picture of churches. So looking at worship, pastoral care, community outreach and leaders and those sorts of themes. And it touched a little bit on children's work. And we see there that according to that research, only about 12 out of 100 churches were able to keep the services for parents and children open there. And then the final quote there on the screen, very much resonating with what Martin was talking about there, this sense that this is a window of time. It's a time that we can be inspired, rather than looking back and feeling sad about what's not happening. Actually, perhaps what is the future? How can we reimagine that? So that's the kind of the scene that I'll be speaking about now. One of my colleagues has been speaking about the pandemic very much like an X-ray. So actually that what it's done is it's highlighted things that were there all along, perhaps things that were great that were there all along, but we weren't as aware of them. And in the pandemic, we've held those things much more tightly. But perhaps the things that were a bit of an annoyance before, and we just were sort of ignoring it and carrying on with them anyway. But now we see how annoying they were, how worthless those things were, and they've just been cast aside. And so it's very much highlighted and accentuated things that perhaps were always there, but we weren't quite so aware of that. So I think we need to be kind of aware to listen for the needs. And there's this sense of kind of evaluating what we're doing, not just sort of sitting back and thinking, well, you know, oh yes, and again, as Martin was just saying, this kind of sense of nostalgia and coziness and things that were in the past, but listen to what the needs are right now in your local context, because there's no kind of magic formula for this. We each need to be looking in our own local context. What are the needs and how can we meet those needs in what we're doing? But also being realistic. What resources do we have in our local context? We can't replicate things that are happening in a different church because our resources will be different. Our teams are different, our volunteers and so on. So really looking at what resources we have, what are the things that are needed, but how can we meet those needs in a realistic way and in a way which is sustainable. There's no use setting out at this stage thinking very enthusiastically, establishing all sorts of things which can't continue in the long term. And then, of course, prayerfully exploring what the next steps may be in light of that. One thing which really has been coming out very, very clearly, and again, this won't really surprise you, is this sense of very diverse experiences that people have had. And thinking particularly of the children that we may have been in contact with previously, thinking about what has it been like for them over this time of the pandemic. And so there on the first point there, minimal faith versus increased input. So for many children, perhaps we have seen they have stayed in touch with church in whatever way during this time. And so they've had some input despite the fact that they haven't been able to access churches physically. However, some children, and significant numbers according to the research, we don't have an exact figure of course, but there was a strong sense that for many of the children, perhaps they hadn't accessed online church because they didn't want to, they didn't have access or whatever, or perhaps their church wasn't doing anything online. And so for that whole time, there was no church input. And for some of those children, they may not have had any input from their family either, or even through their school, if that was relevant. And so for some of these children, we may be in a situation where they may, and hopefully do, come back to whatever we're providing as things start to open up. And actually, perhaps for a year or more, they've never even heard God mentioned. They've never had any sort of encouragement to nurture their own faith and spirituality. And yet on the opposite extreme, some children have had an increased input and parents have been very active. And when churches have been closed, they've been very proactive to provide things. So actually, the situation is that children have such a breadth of experience now in terms of their faith. So we need to be very aware of this as we're formulating how we can help them and support them in their continuing faith journey. Of course, access issues there in terms of technology, but other things have limited and caused a diversity of experience. As I said before, some special needs children found helpful, some haven't. That's added to the diversity. And then this thing very much so about the geography of congregations. So for those congregations that were quite close-knit communities, it was easy to keep in touch and to connect with one another. But where it's a lot more scattered, actually that was quite a challenge to keep in touch with those children. And so for some children who used to see other congregation members as people who could be trusted and so on, or people who felt safe, actually now perhaps they're just strangers. So very much we need to be aware of this diversity of experience. So some things to kind of think about, as I said, it's thinking about it a bit like an X-ray. What things were there before? And again, Martin touched on this. Were things working perhaps quite so well as we thought before? And we need to perhaps evaluate them now. So being aware that children don't sit still. So sitting looking at a computer screen isn't necessarily for the kind of Sunday school online or whatever, isn't necessarily appropriate for children. But children are curious. Children want to explore. Children want to discover. And so what is our aim and our purpose in the work that we're doing as we're moving forward and reimagining and reshaping what we're doing? Do we want to be cultivating a child's wonder, a child's sense of wonder about the world and therefore their kind of worship of God in that way? Or are we wanting to increase their knowledge of the Bible? Or are we wanting to support them in developing their prayer life? Or do we want to present them with role models of faith? What is our purpose? What is our aim? And I think if we can think about that, what kind of spirituality, what kind of faith are we wanting to form and shape and encourage in our children? That will undoubtedly shape what provision we offer. What role do children have to play? Very much this has again been highlighted during the pandemic, because often children don't have a voice, and this connects with another point further down. And increasingly during the pandemic, any voice that perhaps was there has perhaps been reduced because it's hard. But, you know, I hear great stories of some places where children are part of the PCC and they have an active voice. Perhaps there's a real strong push at gathering children and saying, right, okay, what do you think our children's ministry should look like now? And actually, these kids have better ideas than us many times. And they know what the needs are for themselves, but also in terms of outreach. What do their friends need? What do their friends like? So thinking about the role that children have to play, and do they feel that they are welcomed and that they belong when they come to our churches in whatever setting that might be. So thinking about reshaping what we're doing, I very much strongly believe we need to really listen to their needs. We can't assume that we know what children want or need. We can't think that, you know, well, when I was a child, I loved singing, you know, this song or that song or doing this, and so we're going to do that. Or even, you know, I enjoy painting, so we're going to do painting every week. Actually, let's listen to what their exact needs are and include their voice within church life, not just within children's ministry, but within church life. So thinking about, you know, are there ways that they could, as I say, serve on the PCC or whatever meetings in those ways? Or are there ways that they could welcome on the door or read Bible passages or do prayers, or perhaps send little cards to the elderly who are struggling and isolated? In what ways do we encourage children to play a part and to have a voice in what we're doing? But also as part of that, to adopt a child-led ethos in our practice. So very much not thinking, you know, well, this week I think we should do about the book of Ruth because I kind of enjoy that story. But in fact saying, right, okay, where are these kids at now? What are their needs? What are they feeling? What are they thinking? What are they experiencing? And therefore, what part of the Bible or what truth do I think might be applicable to them? So really, or perhaps also allowing them to choose and to say to us what program they would like to follow, or what books they would like to uncover together. But very much I would say this as well, it's not all about the program, it's about the people. And I think we've really seen this during COVID. So Many children's workers, well, I must say, absolutely everybody who's done anything during this time is just amazing, because in the craziness and chaos and difficulty and challenge that's been going on, it's been amazing to see, remarkable to see the creativity, the adaptiveness, and the flexibility of people who've done things. So just absolutely well done for anybody who's done anything to support children in their faith during this time. But I would say it's us as people who are the unique selling point, if you like, of the church. You know, kids can go on YouTube and watch a few movies, they can see things and so on, which are probably a little bit more exciting than we could reenact in our setting. But what they can't access on YouTube is the people who care about them, the people who invest in them, the people who pray for them, the people who talk to them about their own faith journey. And so actually thinking about how can we incorporate that sense of people into what we're doing, and helping children to connect with the people, rather than just spending half the week recording and editing and producing all these things, or cutting out loads of shapes and so on. Although those things are all wonderful, actually what kids really need is people contact with people of faith, people who will encourage and inspire them in their faith journeys. And I think as part of that, there's no one size that fits all. So, you know, like I said earlier, children have had very different experiences during this time. And so we need to be listening. We need to be saying to children and families, okay, what's been your experience in the pandemic? What have you done in terms of faith? Have you read the Bible? Have you done this? Have you done that? Not in a judgmental kind of way, but in a way so that we can listen and think, okay, so perhaps this child here has experienced bereavement and they're struggling to see how God fits into that. And so we need to do something specific to help them with that. Or perhaps other kids have had a really great time and loads of family time, and they're struggling moving back to school, or this kind of thing. So what is it that is the thing? And so as part of that, I think small group work is emerging as so powerful. So perhaps gathering small groups of children and in very targeted ways, seeking to disciple and support them in their faith journey seems to be working really effectively. And giving children a role and a part to play. I've already mentioned that a few times so far. But also, as a parent myself, I think we need to be so aware of parents, many of whom are feeling so exhausted, and often they were reporting feeling ill-equipped and disempowered. And I think as churches, we don't necessarily, I don't think it's deliberate, but I think inadvertently we perhaps disempower parents by giving this message across. You know, if you bring your child to Sunday school, we will sort them out spiritually, and you could take them home to carry on for the rest of the week. But actually, we need to perhaps readjust what we're doing and see ourselves as partners with parents, partners with families. And so a few things here. How can we equip and empower Christian parents to be intentionally aware? So listen, you know, how has this been for you? How's the last week been for you? And then to be kind of letting them know that we've heard that it's tricky, and to kind of reinforce that we're there to support, listen to their exact needs, again, not assuming that we know, but recommend resources in a very tailored way. So one of the things that came out, nearly every parent that I spoke to in the research talked about how they just felt bombarded by resources. So particularly in the early stages of the pandemic, everybody sort of went into overdrive of what can we do to help people. And I was getting them myself, all these endless lists of like 30 different websites that I could go on to help. And it was too much. And for many people, it just is bombarding. So perhaps for us as representatives of the church, or those working in the church, we can listen to what the exact needs of families. We can be aware of what different resources are available, and we can suggest specific things to families. And then to go back a few weeks later, how's that been? Has that been helpful? Okay, it didn't work. Let's try this one now. And to really support them in finding resources which are helpful, to show that we care and we support long term. So even when we're kind of getting fed up of, you know, masks or social distancing or whatever it is, to continue asking how are they doing, how are they getting on, and so on. and show that we're there long term for them, and to enable them to feel part of the community in whatever way they feel able. So again, many were reporting that they felt, you know, all the church wants is for me to come and be a volunteer on the Sunday school team or whatever, but I can't, I'm too busy, I've got all this going on. So actually we need to really have in our minds, we want to encourage them to be part of our church community, but how can they do that? What is realistic for them? And then finishing off this final slide really is this notion, I'm sure you've all heard this concept, it takes a village to raise a child. And I so love the thing of church, the model that we have of church, this intergenerational community where we can support one another, we can support children, we can support families in all that they're doing and all that they're living. We can do life with them. And so let's capitalize on that. Let's use that to be a springboard really for the kind of this revitalized work that we're doing, this revitalized ministry. So think about the children and families' experience of church. Do they feel welcome? Do they feel valued? What are their needs? And then how can we restructure the frameworks? How can we restructure things that we already have so that there's this partnership, this greater collaboration? But also let's not ignore the fact that we have lots of different generations, but let's use that as part of what we're doing, as part of inspiring younger generations to see the faith of older generations, and vice versa, of course, and broadening the influence so that children have these role models of faith to inspire them on their journey, and very much to develop this ethos with the congregation as a whole. So again, I was hearing in the research that perhaps the pandemic, through all sorts of reasons, has meant that the responsibility of children or family ministry has fallen to perhaps a much smaller number of people. And so let's try to flip that around and to encourage the whole of the congregation to be involved in whatever the way that might be. Maybe that's praying, maybe that's just coming alongside a family and encouraging them by saying something nice, or maybe it is getting involved in whatever activities we're doing, and so on. So that was all I kind of was going to share with you now. So I think I'm going to hand back to Isabel to continue our thoughts further.